Back in college, I went after a cute, broke guy in my major. After a lot of aggressive pursuing, I got him. But our breakup was a complete mess. 2 years later, the same boy whose clothes were once faded and worn was now in an expensive, custom-tailored suit. The CEO of the SN Corporation. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his voice was exhausted but soft. "Annie," he said, "I just want to be stuck with you forever." At the far end of the long table in the SN Corporation's conference room sat a man in a sharp suit. He looked a little familiar. The thought flickered and was gone. I cleared my throat. The man turned around. The moment our eyes met, the file folder nearly slipped from my hand. "Mark?" The same broke kid I used to chase all over campus, the one whose clothes were always worn out. He looked at me with a sharp, unfamiliar edge in his eyes. "Long time no see, Annie." His fingers tapped a steady rhythm on the tabletop. I let out a cold laugh and tossed the files onto the table. My eyes swept over the Patek Philippe on his wrist. "You've got to be kidding me. The guy who used to have to split a BOGO coffee deal with me is wearing a watch like that now? Aren't you afraid you'll sprain your wrist?" Mark stood up. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the floor was jarring. He walked toward me, his presence overwhelming. I straightened my back, standing my ground until his shadow fell over me. Only then did I slowly tilt my head up. "What? Are you trying to use your height to intimidate me?" His breath was hot on my skin. I subconsciously stepped back, my lower back hitting the cold edge of the table. Mark braced his hands on either side of me. His breath brushed against my cheek. Better than someone who breaks their promises. I raised a hand to push him away, but he twisted my arm behind my back. His thumb pressed into my wrist bone. I tried to struggle, but he held me firm. "Mark, let go." "Let go?" Mark chuckled, grabbing a document from the table with his other hand. "Sign this agreement, and you can have whatever resources you want from my company." My gaze fell on the words marriage agreement. "What do you take me for? Some vegetable you can haggle over at the market?" I struggled, twisting my shoulders. But Mark's grip only tightened, the pinky ring on his finger digging painfully into my wrist. The muscle in his clenched jaw twitched, suppressing his anger. "Back when you used my mom's surgery bills to force me to be with you, you never asked if I was willing to be a toy for the great Mississippi Lynn." Hearing this, I sneered. My mocking gaze locked onto his eyes. "You seemed to enjoy it well enough back then. Why the act now?" Mark's breathing grew heavy. His grip on me loosened slightly. But the moment I tried to pull away, he trapped me tightly between the table and his chest. Mark's knee pushed my legs apart. His body heat radiated through our clothes, making my spine tingle. "You're right, I did enjoy it. And now, I even want to marry you." His voice was low and strained. Each word seemed forced through gritted teeth. The edge of the table was digging painfully into my tailbone. "Marry you? Have you lost your mind?" Mark's hand moved to the nape of my neck. His fingertips traced my skin, the touch light. Then, his grip suddenly tightened. I was forced to look up at his bloodshot eyes. "I'm perfectly sane. I want you to have to look at my face every single day, to be tangled up with me for the rest of your life." A humorless laugh escaped my lips. Without warning, I swung my hand and slapped him. He didn't flinch. I watched as a red mark instantly bloomed on his cheek. He turned his head to the side, silent for a couple of seconds. His hand, hanging by his side, clenched into a fist, his knuckles turning white. Mark slowly turned his head back, staring at my reddened fingers. He pressed my hand against his hot cheek. "Do it again." His voice was hoarse, filled with an almost forgiving exhaustion. I wanted to curse him out, but something caught in my throat, and I couldn't speak. His eyelashes brushed against my palm. "Annie, you sign the contract, and I'll give you the official stamp." Back at my company, I had barely warmed up my chair before my father's executive assistant knocked on my door. "Mr. Lin wanted me to ask if you got the contract stamped." I leaned back in the leather chair, spinning a pen between my fingers. My wrist still ached faintly. An image of the redness in Mark's eyes flashed through my mind. It didn't look like shame. It looked more like a stubborn obsession that had finally broken through. My gaze fell on the marriage agreement I'd brought back with me. A strange emotion made me irritable. The tough nut he couldn't crack himself, he really expects me to handle it? The pen tip paused on the desk. I gripped it tightly. I pushed the feeling down. Who is this SN Corporation boss anyway? I thought the Brooke family's heir was a notoriously worthless, spoiled brat. The assistant's tone was calm and measured. Word is, he's an illegitimate son who worked his way up. He returned to the Brooke family about 2 years ago and pushed out the original heir without much trouble. Now, this Mr. Brooke is the one calling all the shots at the company. Worked his way up. I scoffed, spinning the pen faster. The Mark of today had none of the proud aloofness from back then. He radiated a ruthless energy that felt completely foreign to me. I saw the assistant's gaze drop, as if he were choosing his words carefully. A few seconds later, he looked up at me. "Before you came back, our collaboration with the SN Corporation was going smoothly. Not long after you returned, the assistant's voice grew even slower. This project suddenly got stalled." My hand stilled, and I raised an eyebrow. What was the reason? The assistant met my gaze, his tone laced with helplessness. There were no issues. Mr. Brooks' side just keeps delaying the approval. Whenever we ask, the answer is always, "Mr. Brooke needs to review it again." My fingers tightened, the pen digging into my palm. A perfectly good project, but he suddenly needs to review it again right after I get back. Mark wasn't stalling the project. He was stalling me. Something heavy settled in my chest. After the assistant left, I rubbed the indentation in my palm. Mark was using the project to pressure me, but I refused to give him the satisfaction. The first time I saw Mark was at a debate tournament. He was the third speaker for the opposing team, wearing a faded school shirt. Our side believes that rationality is more important. His voice was as smooth as jade, like a feather tickling my heart. After that day, I had a friend in the student union get me his class schedule. When Mark was in the cafeteria getting free soup, I dumped my sweet and sour pork ribs right into his bowl. "Eat up. Or do you want me to feed you?" I threw out his patched-up old quilt and replaced it with a new down comforter. He found me downstairs from my dorm. "Annie, what the hell are you trying to do? Is it a crime to be nice to you?" Mark was honestly the most difficult person I had ever met. Until one day, I accidentally found out his mom was sick in the hospital. I was leaning against the second-floor railing of the academic building, listening to the sound of footsteps getting closer from downstairs. The moment Mark looked up and saw me, he flinched back. I lifted my chin. "Why are you hiding? It's not like I'm going to eat you." He didn't say anything, just retreated half a step toward the stairwell. His face was half hidden in the shadows, his expression unreadable. I sensed he was about to bolt and said casually, "Your mom's surgery next week, you're still short about 32 grand? Mark's brow furrowed instantly, his eyes boring into me. His voice was hoarse, every word laced with thorns. "You've been investigating me? Annie, will you ever just stop?" I walked down the stairs and stopped 2 steps above him. I leaned down slightly to look at his face. "I'll cover all of your mom's hospital expenses." He recoiled. I closed the distance, step by step, until his back hit the wall behind him. He looked utterly humiliated. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of savior?" I chuckled softly. My fingertips gently brushed the faded cuff of his shirt. "Mark, pride doesn't pay for medical bills. When your mom is lying in a hospital bed, what good is that pride of yours?" The words had barely left my mouth when Mark suddenly lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. His grip was so strong it made me wince. Annie. He ground out my name. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned in closer. Be my boyfriend. I'll pay for everything, down to the last penny. His breathing grew ragged, but his grip on my hand loosened. Annie, you're really something else. He opened his mouth to say more, but all that came out was a self-deprecating laugh. Leaving the project stalled wasn't a solution. The next afternoon, I drove straight to the SN Corporation's building. I didn't have an appointment. The receptionist wore a professional smile. She informed me in a by-the-book tone that I couldn't see him without an appointment. I lounged on a sofa in the waiting area. Couldn't see him? I sneered. My tone carried a certainty that even I hadn't realized was there. If I wanted to see Mark, there was nowhere for him to hide. It was like that before. And even now that he was the great Mr. Brooke, it had to be the same. I called Mark's assistant. Josh, do me a favor and ask Mr. Brooke if he's decided he doesn't want to sign the agreement after all. Without waiting for a reply, I hung up. I stared at the private elevator. As the numbers descended, the elevator next to it opened first with a ding. I narrowed my eyes, a cold smile playing on my lips. I got up and started walking toward the main entrance. Mississippi Lynn, please wait a moment. Josh hurried after me, his voice urgent. Mr. Brooke is. I didn't break my stride, just glanced back at him. You're not the one I'm here to see. I pulled out the agreement, which was creased from being folded, and stuffed it into his hands. I was rough, and he fumbled it. Take this back to your Mr. Brooke. As for the stamp. My peripheral vision caught the elevator number, which had just hit the second floor. I deliberately dragged out the last word. He can stamp it or not. I don't care. Whether the Lynn Corporation sinks or swims, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not a person who responds well to threats. Just then, the sound of the elevator door opening echoed through the lobby. I quickened my pace. Josh's panicked Mississippi Lynn came right on cue. I didn't look back. I knew he saw me. And I was going to make him taste what it felt like to be left standing there again. Wait. It was the familiar voice from my memories. Back then, whenever I turned to leave, he would always stand there for a long time. Only when I was almost out of sight would I hear his muffled, wait. He could never bear to let me get too far away. I turned around. I saw Mark bending down to pick up the agreement Josh had dropped. He smoothed out the creases with his hand. You really don't care? Mark looked down, our eyes meeting. I smiled at him, then let my gaze fall to the document in his hand. I didn't answer his question. My voice was light and casual as I replied. What do you think, Mr. Brooke? He frowned slightly. He seemed both exasperated and forgiving of my deliberate coyness. Mark's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed a laugh. Annie, besides me, who else do you expect to understand what you really mean when you say the opposite? My fingers paused. I looked up and met his eyes. In that moment, I felt all the unspoken understanding between us. I smiled, a smirk playing on my lips. My finger tapped lightly on his chest. Mark. Mark took my wrist and led me toward the elevator. Back in Mark's office. I sat down in the chair opposite him. Let's talk about the project. I slid the file I had prepared across the desk to him. He glanced at the document, his tone nonchalant. Trying to buy me off with resources? I knew this file was no different from scrap paper in his eyes. It's a partnership. You approve my project, and I'll give you a prime piece of land. Mark let out a short, sharp laugh, slowly twisting the silver pinky ring on his finger. The ring style was old-fashioned, not something a man of his current status would typically wear. I don't need anyone to give me things. The implication was clear. He wasn't short on projects, and he certainly wasn't short on resources. I didn't respond. I just took a small box out of my purse and placed it on his desk. What if I add this? The moment Mark's eyes landed on it, his pupils contracted. It was the first gift he ever gave me. A bracelet that he, a poor student, had bought me by saving up half a month's lunch money. I had carelessly tossed it away when we broke up, only to secretly go back and retrieve it later. He stared at the box for a long time, so long that I thought the deal was off. Finally, Mark slowly raised his hand, his fingers hovering in midair. "Are you sure you want to trade this?" Even though I was the one who had offered the box. His question made me feel a pang of regret. But I stubbornly turned my head away, avoiding his piercing gaze. "If the project isn't enough for you, Mr. Brooke, is this enough to make you reconsider?" Mark opened the worn, frayed box. The thin silver chain had oxidized and turned black. The edges of the small, crooked moon charm were worn smooth. His fingertips gently stroked it. His eyes flickered with countless emotions. His voice was just as soft. "This isn't for trading." Mark closed the box, tapping his finger on the lid. "When I was saving up to buy this, the old jeweler asked if I wanted to have it engraved. I said no. I told her you'd know it was for you the moment you saw it." My hand, clutching my purse strap, trembled. Why did he still remember all this? He was the one who said that being with me had been an ordeal. Mark stood up and walked around the desk to stand in front of me. I instinctively tried to shrink away, but he held my shoulders. He pressed the box into my hand. He didn't say a word, just stared into my eyes. My knuckles turned white as I clutched the box. I lowered my head, not daring to meet his gaze any longer. "I'll stamp the approval." I snapped my head up. He reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from my forehead. "But I'm not trading you for it." The box slipped from my grasp, the chain uncoiling and wrapping around my hand. "Mark, sign the marriage agreement." He turned back to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out the company stamp. He didn't press it down immediately. His gaze fell on my hand, tangled in the silver chain. "Don't use these things to bargain with me again. You don't have that much goodwill left to trade." The red ink bled onto the white paper. Mark's words pierced my heart like a needle. An assistant came in with a message. I was in the middle of processing an urgent file. "We have a message from the SN Corporation. They said that from now on, you must personally handle all future collaborations between the Brooke and Lynn families." Hearing this, I stopped signing the document. 2 years apart, and Mark had learned to use his status to throw his weight around. But it was just as clumsy as it was back then. Using the project as an excuse to see me. Trying to control the situation by holding all the cards, only to lose his advantage the moment he opened his mouth. "Mark, even if you climb to the very top, when it comes to me, you still have to bow your head. Since you're the one who wants to keep this going, we'll play by my rules. Don't think you can control me just because you think you figured me out." The assistant's voice broke through my thoughts. "Josh, the executive assistant, said there's a project that needs your review. Mr. Brooke is waiting for you at Willow Creek." I looked up at my assistant. "A message?" I scoffed. So he's a big shot CEO now, sending messages through other people. I stood up and grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. As I walked past my assistant, I told him, "Tell Josh that I'm busy tonight. Their Mr. Brooke can wait a few more days." The elevator doors reflected my triumphant smile. The more he postured, the better my chances of winning this childish game. As I drove out of the garage, the evening wind messed up my hair. But it couldn't blow away the complicated feelings churning inside me. The Cantonese restaurant was packed. A waiter led me to a private room. Kevin looked up as I entered. "You finally made it." I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, just having draped my jacket over the back. His voice cut in. "Annie, about Mark." "Kevin." He was still the same as ever, always wanting to cut straight to the chase. After I interrupted him, he stared at me intently, then sighed in resignation. "Do you two have to be like a pair of hedgehogs, trying to poke each other to death? It was like this back then, and it's still like this now?" I impatiently crossed my legs, my arms folded across my chest. My face was a mask of undisguised anger. Did I start it? Since I came back, I haven't asked a single thing about him. He's the one holding the contract hostage, forcing me to go see him. Who's the one who can't let go? Kevin loosened his tie. His tone was tinged with frustration. Don't give me that attitude. Is that attitude going to solve anything? I think the current situation is just fine. If he wants to play games, I'll play along. I pursed my lips and turned my head away. Only I knew how little conviction was behind those words. Kevin raised his voice, slamming his hand on the table. He wants to get back together with you. Hearing that, I found it laughable. That the words "get back together" were coming from someone other than Mark. I turned back, a cold smile on my face as I retorted. Do you think he looks like he wants to reconcile with me right now? A sigh, so soft it was lost between us, escaped my lips. I think he's out for revenge. Kevin moved his chair next to mine. He turned to face me. That's because there are still issues between you two. I met his eyes, my smile bitter. Issues are meant to be solved, not to fuel resentment. A feeling of helplessness enveloped me. I fought to break free, but Mark kept pulling me back in, again and again. It's been 2 years, and he still hasn't changed that damn habit of bottling everything up. I'm not a mind reader. If he doesn't say it, I have to pretend I don't know. As I spoke, my voice started to crack. I clutched the tissue Kevin handed me. I'm not going to make excuses for what happened back then. I admit I handled it badly. So I can accept him treating me like this now because of his mother's death. Kevin was silent for a moment, then shook his head gently. It's not because of his mom. She used him as a tool to see his wealthy father. She used to beat him so badly he'd end up in the hospital. What Mark felt for her was hatred. Hearing Kevin's words, I frowned. If that was true, but he only got together with me back then because of her medical bills. No matter what, she was still the woman who gave birth to him. He couldn't just ignore her. I remembered the look of humiliation in his eyes in the stairwell back then. At the time, I thought it was just the shame of being bought with money. Only now did I understand. Back then, I was no different from the mother who had hurt him. Kevin looked at my stunned expression. He resents you for abandoning him. I snapped out of my pained thoughts. But back then, I couldn't have protected him even if I'd wanted to. The day I stormed into my house. My father was sitting in a mahogany chair in the living room, a cigar between his fingers. Dad, why did you cut off my cards? My father flicked his ash, not even bothering to look up. The money I give you is for you to spend on yourself. Not on that, whatever his name is. He hadn't even bothered to remember Mark's name. I looked at him, devastated, but he just waved his hand dismissively. You don't need to tell me. A man who needs a woman to fix his problems isn't worth remembering. I took a step forward, my shin hitting the coffee table. The pain made me double over. But I couldn't care about that right now. Dad, it's a person's life. Even if you don't do it for me, I'm begging you, have a little compassion. I pleaded with him, my voice trembling. But my father just stubbed out his cigar in the ashtray. His cold voice echoed in the empty living room. Compassion is the cheapest thing in the world. His words were like a bucket of ice water poured over my head. I froze on the spot. Later. My father took away my phone. And sent me out of the country as quickly as possible. I tried to send messages to Mark, but they all went unanswered. I only heard about his mother's death from Kevin. By the time I left the restaurant, it had started to pour. Kevin had an emergency meeting and couldn't drive me home. I waited by the entrance for my assistant to pick me up. A black Bentley pulled up in front of me. The window rolled down. Mark's profile was blurry in the rain-swept darkness. He pushed the door open and got out. The rain was heavy, and his jacket was instantly soaked. He grabbed my wrist without a word and pushed me into the passenger seat. Before I could even struggle, he had locked the car doors. Seat belt. His voice was flat, but his eyes were on my unbuckled seatbelt. I turned to look out the window. The rain was coming down even harder. What did you and Kevin talk about? Project details. Really? He let out a low laugh, a laugh filled with obvious disbelief. Project details that made your eyes red? I turned to look at him. He was focused on the road ahead. The lines of his profile seemed almost soft in the dim light. What are you doing here? Mark ignored me, his fingers tapping a rhythm on the steering wheel. I waited for you at Willow Creek for 2 hours. Didn't I have Josh tell you I was busy? Yeah. He grunted in acknowledgement. While we were stopped at a red light, he reached into the back seat and grabbed a file folder. He tossed it onto my lap. I'm delivering the documents. I opened it. Inside were the details of the next phase of our company's collaboration. His flamboyant signature was on the last page. I put the file away and curled my lip. You could have just sent Josh. No need to trouble yourself with a personal delivery, Mr. Brooke. Mark's voice blended with the roar of the engine. Annie, do you really hate the sight of me that much? Mark's question was so direct, so unlike him. It was more like me, back in the day, pestering him over and over, asking if he liked me. He'd be so annoyed he couldn't focus on his homework. He'd frown, his face full of irritation. I already told you I like you. How many more times are you going to ask? Then he'd quickly look down again. His attitude never bothered me, because I had spotted his ears, secretly blushing. A bitter taste filled my mouth. How could I possibly waste Mr. Brooks' precious time? You can always waste my time. The sound of raindrops hitting the windshield blurred his words. What? His thumb fiddled with the silver pinky ring. I remembered he never liked wearing jewelry. This ring, which was clearly the wrong size, had been on his finger since the day we met again. Mark tilted his head slightly. I was caught off guard as our eyes met. He raised his voice slightly. I said, you can always waste my time. I clutched the file on my lap. I didn't dare look at him anymore. Mark didn't say another word. But I knew he was still looking at me. The campus was buzzing with the atmosphere of the university's anniversary celebration. I stood in front of the bulletin board, under the heading Notable Alumni. A large photo of Mark was posted at the very top. In the picture, he was wearing a black suit, his tie perfectly knotted, giving a slight, expressionless nod to the camera. I stared at the photo for a few seconds and scoffed. It's an okay picture, I guess. I overheard 2 female students talking nearby. Mr. Brooke is so handsome. The girl in the white dress stood on her toes, leaning closer to the glass and tapping Mark's face in the photo. I wonder if we'll get to see him at the celebration today. The other girl, with a ponytail, chimed in. Someone posted on the school's social media that he's giving a speech in the auditorium. Let's go check it out. The 2 girls walked away, chatting. The area in front of the bulletin board fell silent again. I stared at Mark's eyes in the photo. They were cold, devoid of any extra emotion. I found myself smirking. Only I knew the emotions he kept hidden from the world. A gust of wind carried the scent of osmanthus flowers. I remembered when he told me he liked me, his eyes held a shyness he couldn't suppress. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message notification. It was Mark, asking where I was. Watching how Mr. Brooke went from a poor kid to a legend. I'm heading back now. I had just pushed open the back door of the auditorium when I heard soft, gentle female voice. It was all too familiar. In college, she was always wearing a cream-colored dress, smiling and chatting as she appeared by Mark's side. It was Sophie. Mark, you're really so different from how you were back then. Sophie's laugh was soft, with a hint of what she thought was intimate teasing. I used to worry you wouldn't find a good job after graduation, and the next thing I know, you're the CEO of the SN Corporation. Before she could finish, Mark cut her off. We don't have anything to catch up on. His tone was polite but carried a clear, bright line of distance. Mark's suit jacket was draped over the chair next to him. Sophie stood beside him, holding a cup of hot milk tea. She must have just bought it, and she was handing it to him. The gesture was as intimate as if they were old friends. But Mark shifted his body slightly, avoiding her approach. His gaze drifted somewhere else entirely. I knew that look. He was getting impatient. Sophie didn't pick up on his distance and instead took half a step closer. I was just thinking, how is your aunt's health? I always meant to visit her in the hospital. Mark's expression darkened. She's gone. Sophie's smile froze on her face. She stammered out apologies, flustered. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I deliberately made a sound. Both of their gazes snapped to me. Our eyes met. The distance in Mark's expression vanished instantly. A faint ripple passed through them. I watched as Sophie forced a stiff smile. Annie? It really is you. I thought you become such a big shot you wouldn't deign to come back. Her words were barbed, just like the time she told me, a rich girl like you who only cares about money isn't right for him. I ignored her and sat down in the chair next to Mark. The jacket he had draped over the back of the chair slipped off. Mark took 2 steps toward me and caught it. Sophie's face grew even more rigid. You two are still in touch. In touch. I let out a soft laugh, not loud, but clear enough for her to hear. Not long ago, Mr. Brooke was talking about wanting to marry me. What kind of in touch would you call that? Sophie's face went completely pale, her fingers widening as she gripped the milk tea. Annie, what do you have besides a little money? That obnoxious personality of yours? I turned my head and looked her straight in the eye. Her words didn't affect my mood in the slightest. Instead, I gave her a provocative smirk. My lips parted slightly. None of your damn business. And you don't even have the money. Mark reached out and rested his hand on my shoulder, a comforting gesture. Sophie was speechless, her eyes welling up with tears. She even looked at Mark, her eyes pleading for help. Mark, look at her. Mark finally spoke, his voice calm. But his words hit Sophie like a stone. She's not wrong. And I am, in fact, waiting for her answer. I felt his gaze land on the top of my head. It was a look so gentle I couldn't ignore it. Sophie practically fled. I watched her retreating back and sneered. Just as I was about to look up and say something to Mark, I met his eyes. His voice was tinged with helplessness, but his eyes were smiling. Satisfied? I narrowed my eyes but didn't really try to look away. It was okay. Compared to the time she stole the love letter I wrote you, this little bit of revenge is nothing. Mark smiled, pulled a piece of candy from his pocket, and pressed it into my palm. I popped the candy into my mouth, the sweet taste spreading across my tongue. I spoke around the candy, my voice a little muffled. Mark, when you told Sophie you had nothing to catch up on, were you afraid I'd get jealous? Would you? I turned my face away, pretending to look at the osmanthus tree outside the window. I would. Ms. Lynn, you can't go in, the chairman is in a meeting. I left my father's executive assistant in my wake. I pushed open the door to the conference room. My father, sitting at the head of the table, simply glanced up at me. He gave a dismissive wave to the astonished board members. That's all for today. The assistant gently closed the door, leaving just my father and me in the room. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug deep into my palms. What do you take me for? A bargaining chip for an arranged marriage? A tool to expand your business empire? I heard my father sigh. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses and pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. His voice had lost its earlier authority. Instead, it was tinged with a faint, almost imperceptible weariness. The marriage alliance, it's not what you think. When you and Mark finalized it, did you ever once ask for my opinion? My father put his glasses back on, his gaze falling on my tense face. He let out a soft chuckle, a hint of amusement in his voice. Are you angry with your dad? Weren't you dying to marry this poor kid back in college? I frowned instantly. When did my father find out that Mark was that poor kid from back then? I remembered my father's attitude toward Mark years ago. I instinctively retorted, I don't know what you're talking about. The moment the words left my mouth, even I was stunned. I was still angry with Mark, still bothered by his claim that our time together was an ordeal. But when my father casually said poor kid, my first instinct was still to protect him. I was harsh with you back then not because I looked down on him for being poor, but because I was angry at his awkward pride. He wouldn't even admit he liked you unless you forced it out of him. How could I entrust the daughter I've raised for 20 years to a man like that? My heart felt like it had been struck by something. It was a mix of sourness and softness, and my eyes reddened before I knew it. So, all my father's harsh words back then were hiding his own considerations. I opened my mouth to defend Mark, to say that he wasn't proud, he just felt he wasn't good enough for me. But before the words could come out, my father spoke again. As for his mother's situation, I had already paid the money before you even came to beg me. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd lose your head again, thinking I had finally deigned to acknowledge him. He looked at me, his eyes overflowing with a gentle warmth. So the guilt I'd felt for 2 years, the self-blame for not being able to protect him. It was all a misunderstanding. It was my father's unique way of testing us. Testing Mark, and testing the impulsive girl I was back then. After I saw him at the SN Corporation, he came to see me many times. He dared to admit to me that he cared about you. I told him there was no use in telling me. I wouldn't pass the message along. The scent of osmanthus blossoms drifted in from outside the window. I remembered when he gave me that silver chain. His ears were bright red, but he still said stubbornly, "It's not worth much. If you don't like it, just throw it away. If you don't like it, just throw it away. I hope you like it. Please don't throw it away. Not just the bracelet. But me, too." Mark was away on a business trip for the past few days. I found the agreement in his office. Next to his flamboyant signature. I signed my name. And left it in the most conspicuous spot on his desk. Ms. Lynn, Mr. Brooke just went into his office. Not even a minute after Josh's message came through. A video call from Mark came in. You signed it? His voice was a little hoarse, trembling with disbelief. I raised an eyebrow at the mark on my screen. I watched as his fingers landed on the paper, gently stroking my signature. I did. He stood with his back to the camera for a couple of seconds. When he turned back, the shock in his eyes had been replaced by a complex, searching look. And a nervousness he couldn't quite hide. Why? He pressed. I was about to use the project as an excuse. When I heard Mark's indulgent tone. Annie, don't use the project as an excuse. He'd seen right through me. I raised a hand to cover my face. What then? That I suddenly saw the light and decided I want to be tangled up with you for the rest of my life? The man in the video suddenly laughed. It was a low, deep laugh, tinged with a sigh. He leaned closer to the camera, his fingertips reaching out from behind the screen. As if trying to touch my face. Yes. His eyelashes cast a light shadow in the camera's view. I looked at his earnest expression. I bit my lip, my voice softening. Mark, that's exactly it. He froze for a second, then lowered his eyes. His fingertips continuously caressed my signature on the agreement. I saw his hand was trembling. Annie. Mark said my name. I answered him casually. His voice was laced with a lingering tenderness. Let's not sign this one. Let's go to City Hall and get a real one. Really? My gaze went past my phone screen to the door in front of me. I decided to graciously perform a magic trick for him. Yeah. He answered with certainty. As soon as I'm done with what I'm working on, I'll... Before he could finish his sentence, the camera started to shake. I pushed open the door to his private break room from the inside. Mark shot his head up at the sound. His pupils contracted, and he held his breath for half a second. The phone in his hand dropped onto the pile of documents in front of him. I leaned against the doorframe. What are you waiting for? Weren't we going to City Hall? I couldn't suppress the smile on my face. It took a moment for Mark to react. He shot up from his chair. He crossed the room in a few strides. He grabbed my wrist, as if afraid I would run away the next second. When did you get here? He asked, looking down at me. The light in his eyes was startlingly bright. I stood on my toes and gently poked his reddening ear. Right before you got back. Mark laughed and swooped me into his arms. He rested his chin on the top of my head. You messed up my rhythm. I hadn't even told you I wanted to get back together yet. My face was pressed against his chest. I could clearly hear his racing heartbeat. I wrapped my arms around his waist. Then tell me now. Mark's arms tightened around me. His nose brushed against the top of my head. Annie, I like you. I've liked you for a long, long time. He released me from his embrace, his fingertips gently caressing my cheek. When I said it was an ordeal back then, it was because I was scared you were just playing with me. I was being stubborn, pretending I didn't care. I looked at his serious face and suddenly remembered the ring on his pinky finger. I placed my hand over his and slipped the pinky ring off his finger. Under his watchful gaze, I slid it onto my own ring finger. It was a perfect fit. No wonder the ring style was so old, and it never fit his hand right. It was because he had bought it for me all those years ago. I wiggled my fingers in front of him. Mark, your confession is too long-winded. Mark took my hand, the one now wearing the ring, and laced our fingers together, filling the empty spaces. He let out a soft sigh. His kiss landed on the crown of my head, slid down past my temple to the tip of my nose, and finally settled on my lips. How are you so smart? I wanted to give you this ring back then. I hooked my arms around his neck and buried my face in his neck. We didn't end up getting the marriage license. In Mark's words, there was no proposal, no diamond ring, no flowers. It was too rushed. He was very solemn when he said it. I didn't have the ability before. Now I want to give you everything I can, not a single thing less. In the break room. Only a single warm, yellow floor lamp was left on. Mark's suit jacket had long been tossed into a corner of the sofa. As our breaths mingled, his lips found the red mark on my wrist. The one he'd left from gripping me too tightly. Does it still hurt? His voice was shrouded in desire. His thumb brushed the baby hairs at the nape of my neck. I didn't answer, just tilted my head up and leaned closer, my lips brushing against the stubble on his jaw. Mark's movements paused for a moment, then the arm around my waist tightened, pulling me closer to him. The heat under my palm was searing. The light from the floor lamp flickered, and the shadows on the wall dipped lower. His kisses trailed down to my collarbone, and an involuntary shiver ran through me. My hands sank deep into his soft hair. Annie. Mark's head was buried in my chest as he panted softly, his voice tinged with a hint of grievance. Don't leave me again. His hand threaded through my hair, a dominant grip. He pressed my head against his beating heart. Mark's arm was under my neck. My hair was tangled in his fingers. Why didn't you ever tell me that my father paid for those medical bills? Mark's breathing was no longer ragged. The way he recounted the story held a sense of release from the past. Your dad's assistant came to give me a message back then. I still remember his words so clearly. I turned over in his arms. I looked up, and he looked down. He said you had already given enough for me, while I couldn't even admit that I liked you. He said if I couldn't see what was in my own heart, I shouldn't even dream of being able to stand by your side. I pressed my hand against his lips. I could feel his warm breath on my palm. My fingers traced down his chin, stopping at his Adam's apple. Mark didn't pull away. He gently took my fingers and brought them to his lips for a kiss. Your dad was right. You were so dazzling, and yet I was such a coward I had to be forced to say I liked you. He let out a low laugh. The vibration in his chest traveled through my body. I wanted so badly to be able to stand tall in front of you. But when I finally could, I was afraid you didn't want me anymore. I wrapped my arms around his waist. Mark's arms held me even tighter. His voice was tinged with self-deprecation. I was so careful, testing your feelings for me, until I could feel them clearly. Only then did I dare to keep walking toward you. Mark said. Annie, forgive me. I was too cowardly. I've always been too cowardly. I smiled and snuggled deeper into his embrace. The shadows on the wall huddled together. The silver ring on my finger sparkled with a faint light. All those winding roads we took, all those hidden words. Finally, in this moment, became. Mark, we're going to be stuck together forever.